people online here? Is it pretty good? Maybe let's just start off by just going around the room and with introductions.
Work goes smoothly when you know the right steps. With Asana, you can coordinate tasks across teams and stay on track, so your team can spend more time celebrating wins. Try it for free at asana.com.
A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. In dreams you will lose your heartaches. Whatever you wish for, you keep. Have faith in your dreams, and someday your rainbow will come smiling through.
Oh, that's great.
No matter how your heart is grieving, if you keep on believing, the dream that you wish will come true.
Can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. For it's hard, you will find, to be narrow of mind if you're young at heart. You can go to extremes with impossible schemes. You can laugh when your dreams fall apart at the seams. And life gets more exciting with each passing day. And love is either in
Wonderful.
your heart.
All right, so it's a technical issue. People online won't be able to get the introductions. We just did introductions around the room, just because we want this to be a very interactive session. We're organizing this, but we have some ideas to bring to the table. But I think we just want to reflect the fact that there's so many experts, and that probably some of you could be giving this workshop in a way too. And that's the foundational part of it. I'm Chris Heaney, co-organizer
Is a wish your heart makes
currently at Johns Hopkins University Public Health there. But I did my training in this space at UNC Chapel Hill. Talking to members named Steve Wayne and folks like Omega Wilson, the West End Association, the people, community leaders with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, and Gary Grant,
your dreams, and
and
someday
as well.
your rainbow will come
So
smiling
we have some material, but we're gonna you'll see very quickly.
no
that it's
matter
gonna be
how
interactive.
your heart is grieving.
Yeah.
If you keep
Yeah,
on
great to meet everybody. Like Chris said, this is going to be really interactive. And a part of what we're going to be talking about here with community engaged research and the continuum is also the continuum of co-creation of knowledge and what that really looks like from a practical perspective, but also from the principles that we employ when we're doing community engaged research and collaborating and taking part in it. And so we also want to embody that in this space as
At
we're
Amica
talking about it as
Insurance,
well, where we
we
all
know
have
it's
our
more
individual
than a life
experiences,
policy.
our collective experiences to learn
It's
from
about
one
the
another.
promise
So
and
that's
responsibility
we all want to make sure that
comes with being a new
we're
parent,
opening this up to be a safe space,
being
for us to
there
talk
day
about
and
our
night,
experiences and really to
and
share
building a plan for tomorrow,
take part
today.
in that co-creation process that we're
for the ones you'll
part of
always
what
look
we're
out
gonna be
for.
highlighting here today.
Trust Amica
And
Life
as Chris said,
Insurance.
I'm Maddie or Matthew
Amica.
I've been working with
Empathy
Chris in,
is our
our
best
partners
policy.
in South Baltimore, like Minor, as well as on the Eastern Shore of Maryland and the Delmarva area with Maria and Michael for about 2 years now. So it's been a great learning experience to be a part of these community academic partnerships and to be able to do work
Stuck
really
on
directly
you.
towards change and dictated
Got a
what's
feeling
most
down
relevant
deep
to
in
the
my soul.
community. So,
I just can't.
all right. Well, for a quick overview,
Guess I'm
I think Chris and I have given
on my way.
Oh yeah, sure. Go back to that previous slide because it's not just us who Maddie and I
Needed a
are here to
friend.
talk with you about it, but we're
And the
adapting
way
this.
I
We
feel
did this
now, I
along
guess
with community partners.
I'll
Michael
be
was
with
there.
you till the end.
Several of our other community partners were
Guess
there,
I'm
and the
on
National Institute of
my
Environmental Sciences.
way.
They have a program called the Partnerships
Mighty
for Environmental
glad
Public
you
Health
stayed.
Program, in which they try to house a lot of their community-based participatory research, community-engaged research, and so we did an invited workshop at their annual meeting. And that's just to say that we're adapting a lot of expertise from other people who are doing this work and really pushing things forward in amazing ways around the country.
So hard to see that a man
all right,
like
so
you
we
could
did
wait
introductions.
for a girl like
So we were just going to first talk about not in depth, like theory of community engaged research, but we're going to focus on one idea together and then do an audience self-reflection for sharing. We're going to go over the concept that community engaged research has become really embedded in a lot of federal government foundation funding. And how many people have seen, in order to apply for this grant, you need to be following the principles of community engaged research. Anybody seen that ever? Okay. But I think what we want to sort of unpack is the idea that community engaged research means one thing to one person and another thing to another person. And if we start to fill in like, researcher or scientist or academic for that person here, it can mean one thing, and it can mean a totally different thing for like a community member who may be living with, the environmental injustices every day. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to just to lay it all out. We're going to go over like a continuum of community engaged research because it's all over funding websites, and it can be sort of, you can nudge it in one direction to the other. And so that's something that we're going to kind of go through. And we're going to have some basic questions that we're going to ask you to reflect on. Do we have those up? So we're going to kind of sit and think and reflect on this idea of a continuum, and ask you to share with us, where do your experiences, if you've had experiences with community engaged research, community academic research, doing any work with any technical expert, could you share with us where you think your experience fell on this community engaged research continuum? And then reflect about how did it work? How did it feel? What did you feel like could be done differently? What were your expectations? And that gets at the idea of sort of these authentic aspects of community engaged research and relating to the 17 principles of environmental justice that Dr. Wilson and everybody, we've been really focusing on a lot. So that's the idea. We're going to do a quick overview of the continuum, just to set the landscape. We welcome input if you think we're missing something on the continuum, and then we'll have an open discussion. Does that sound all right? Okay, so this goes back to Sherry Arnstein with the ladders of participation, right? You can have manipulation at the very bottom. You can placation. You can have, it can be basically to serve the interests of someone who holds power to maintain power, right? And so Sherry Arnstein was talking about these ladders. As you get to the top of the ladder, you're having more democratic processes, more autonomy, more agency, more control. And Omega Wilson, who had a session earlier this week, talked about equity in funding and parity in management. So you're going in this community ladder up, towards increased power and control by community, basically. And that was just to give you a sense of this has been around. This discussion is very, very old as time, almost. I mean, you think about all of the ways that civilizations and we've organized ourselves. It's colonial, serfdom, all of the exploitative practices with labor and goods. This is age old, but academically, Sherry was one of the first to really do this. The federal government has incorporated this now across a lot of their work, and here's an example, I believe, from the Department of Health and Human Services. So this has really made its way into the federal government. It's driven, as we know, a lot of the funding decisions. It essentially has to do with power. It has to do with who has the power and who doesn't have the power. And depending on how old you are, with power comes great responsibility is either a quote by Roosevelt or Spider-Man. I don't know. I read Spider-Man to my kids all the time now. I'm old enough to know Teddy Roosevelt as well. Or sorry, Franklin Roosevelt. But it's this idea that you have to be evaluating, no matter where you are on a continuum of community engaged research, there's responsibility and power on the community side, but there's also responsibility and power on the technical, scientific, academic, or research side as well. So that's something that we want to have you reflect on. And so this is the main kind of idea, is that you have sort of the classic biomedical model is we have a research question, we have funding, we have a new drug, perhaps, we have a new treatment, we want to perform a randomized controlled trial, we need a population in which to test this hypothesis and this research question. Can you help us through community participatory research get access to a population, right? That's the far left, okay? It's almost community placed. It's, I'm just gonna be real, this may feel or may sound more familiar, community shopping, right? Like looking for a community, doesn't matter who, they need to just hopefully be of a certain sociodemographic characteristics, balance in terms of, male and female, but the control is with the academic who has the research question in mind, right? So that's the far end of the spectrum. And as you move to the right, you start to increase power, responsibility, and leadership of, it could be in that randomized controlled trial at the participants. Imagine the participant being able to say, was that, would you be open to feedback, Dr. Lead of this trial, And would anything change with the trial? No, it's pretty much locked in stone. So you're really pushing power, responsibility, and leadership all the way down to the right, where you get through saying, a lot of people originally said community-based research, then it was formally put into community-based participatory research. But interestingly, I've seen fewer funding announcements over the year that use community-based participatory research, and many more are just saying community-engaged research, okay? And I think I would love to hear, because I have ideas about why and how that term can be, nudged and fudged a little bit. And then all the way down to the right, you're getting past CBPR to something Omega Wilson started, which is community-owned and managed research. They own the problems. They want to own the solutions. They're taking on a lot of the corporate companies, hire lawyers, intellectual property, anything I write down in my organization, my ideas, you can't come into my file cabinets. You can't ask for it. You're not going to X Foundation, whoever it is, with $1 billion endowment, come in and look at my files, figure out how I did something, and go away and take my intellectual property of how I stopped $1 billion industrial complex, right, as a small, tiny little community organization. So community-owned and managed research is all the way far down on the left, where the community hires and fires the experts that they want and trust to do the work that they say needs to be done. And so it involves, the bottom is the idea of who's in charge. The far left, the academics or the research scientists are in charge. And then the far right, the community's in charge. How many people is this, like, the idea of a community being in charge? Is that something you ever thought or heard of before? Okay, good. All right, we're a good audience. So I think that might be the extent of it. And this is just another way of showing it. With the circle being the whole scientific research process, every box is like, what's the idea? What's the problem? How would you say that in the form of like a research question? And then how would you design a study to answer that research question? And that continuum is all about who's in charge. This PI is principal investigator. That's the person who's in charge of the study, right? And can the community be the PI? They're the ones making all the decisions. Who's supported financially, who has to do all the budgeting and accounting and distribution of resources, and can the community, or should the community be in the lead? Or does the university take the lead? And that is kind of the tension, or the place where we can think about a term like community engaged research. And somebody could say, oh yeah, I'm community engaged research, and put over a whole set of community organizations, but it's an academic lead. And can you really tell where the community is having equity in funding and parity in management and all of these steps? So that's some of the challenges. And then, Maddie, anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I think you covered this a lot, or covered a lot of this So I guess I do want to hear from the group and some reflections, especially because it seems like there's some familiarity with maybe the idea of community engaged research being a continuum, but a lack of familiarity about this actually being implemented in when we're talking about providing funding or applying for funding, about proposals. So I think also thinking about I also want us to think about how to engage this idea of the continuum of community engaged research into actually getting resources, finance, or funding to communities to make those decisions. And that's a part of sharing leadership and sharing power, is about who actually is able to put money on the table and is able to actually decide what their priorities and what actions will be in a partnership. So that's another component of this. So it's not just about from an academic or doing the research perspective, but also about how to utilize this framework and this framing to push for and to advocate for having resources be allocated in a way that gives community that provides community with the opportunity and the ability to make those decisions and to set those priorities for what research looks like. So I think in addition to some of these discussion questions about where our experiences and past experience and maybe things that we're even brainstorming, where that falls onto the continuum, but also think about those enacted realities of how this framing applies to other areas of this research complex as well.
Sure.
So I've spoken to a lot of community groups working with academics and a lot of academics, researchers who really sincerely want to work with communities. One of the structural issues that is like one of the major irritants in trying to put together those coalitions is the indirect costs and the overhead that the university charges. So if you go in partnership with the university, it's pretty standard for the university to take 35% of a grant right off.
Or more.
Or more than 60.
Yeah.
But this morning in the general session, it was like a big deal that nonprofits could take 15% for overhead costs, but the universities are taking way more. So going right in, best of intentions on both sides, that structure already creates a power imbalance and a lot of resentment among the community groups who also have, they have their overhead and their salaries and stuff. So I'm wondering what Bloomberg is doing or what Johns Hopkins is doing to address that. That's really getting in the way of these equitable partnerships. Almost every group I've spoken to brings that up.
That's a huge challenge. So there are not, as far as I've found, good solutions institutionally. I mean, the reality is that Hopkins has a negotiated indirect rate with pick your agency, pick your foundation or federal agency. They have a negotiated indirect rate. That's a contract that goes to the University Research Administration Office with lawyers. And there's accountability and auditing and all the history of that goes along with that kind of a negotiated rate. So I haven't found, the only idea within the institution that I've heard of is that you might enlist the services of a standalone entity that manages funds instead of Hopkins, and then they take a different cut, okay? There's always a cut. There's always an amount that comes off the grants. But just so everybody's aware, for what the issue you're talking about, there are, I don't know if they're nonprofits or what, but there are organizations out there that will be a fiscal sponsor for you and handle and manage and distribute the money. And I think it's up to everybody to have that open conversation with how is it different than if an academic institution, and what is their indirect rate, and how does that compare to the operating expenses that a standalone entity would charge. And then that's sort of the institutional answer to your question. The other is maybe, I don't know, Michael, if you want to reflect on this, but the thing that I try to do with each of my community partners is to say, let's unpack this together. Let's think, what is the best way to flow this? If we're dealing with, a certain negotiated rate that a small nonprofit might have or not, and then there's often like a standard percentage, like 15% is 10 or 15% is sometimes that standard. And often I'll open it up and say, how should we structure this? What is the best way to do it? Have the funds go directly to you versus to flow through Hopkins? And depending on the agency, that matters a lot. EPA, any institutional indirect rates come out of the total dollar amount that the project team could get. It's not like NIH indirect rate is you get the specified amount that you're allowed to request to do the work, and then they would provide the indirect dollars on top of those funds. Does everybody understand that? Say you're allowed to ask for $500,000 a year, right? EPA would say if Hopkins has an indirect rate of 62 or whatever, 60%, you don't get $500,000, you get the subtraction of whatever Hopkins' indirect rate is from that, right? So you get less than $500,000. For NIH, if you say $500,000 and you're provided that, they would pay that Hopkins indirect rate on top. So the team would still have $500,000 to work with. And those are those are some of the nuances of, do you work with an institution, or do you try to make the argument that, you know, the PI is justified to be a community?
Yeah, I mean, they've been very creative in trying to find ways to navigate those very issues. A lot of it, I think, is housing it somewhere else in a fiscal sponsor that's not going to have a rate like that. But it can be challenging to find the right entity, I'm sure, if the community doesn't have the.
Is that what you did with your group?
Well, we've put us as like PIs on projects to be able to give the funds directly to, say, our nonprofit, right, where we don't have that like massive overhead rate, and then if they're a sub under that, they can charge their overhead costs to the portion of the project that they're getting, but it's not coming out of the entire. That's how it's handled previously.
Yeah, Sean.
Just to go a little further, so are you doing a lot, is Hopkins doing a lot of that? Are you finding partners that are good administrators of that money so that that can happen? I have been kind of aghast at how much goes to universities. And it would be much better for everybody if we could say, okay, the fiscal sponsor is going to be over here. We will hire the university.
Yep.
It would
Yep.
make so much more sense.
Yep.
But are the universities okay with that? And are the funders okay with that? Because they may look at, well, who is this? Unless there's kind of an agreement on who works as a fiscal sponsor and can make sure that the money goes to the right places.
Yeah, I think the answer, I would say, it may be can I just edit your question and say that I don't know that I think I can say something about like the universities, are they okay with that? But I would think in our session today, it's about individuals within universities who might be trying to navigate that continuum and trying to find the right fit. Because, you know, universities are trying, you may debate whether or not the indirect rate should be 60 or 40 or 30, right? But it is a reality that universities are institutions. They have rent, they have lights, they have utilities and all of that, and they've got staff. So that is a reality, and that they have those negotiated rates for good reason, right, with funding agencies. What I think is really great and new is that with the funding agencies putting really big, meaningful dollars for funding announcements where it says, previously it was like, you know, if you meet the qualifications, and it would say, for example, one of the following, like, and it read a lot of academic or research institutions. There's a lot of private research institutions as well as, you know, public and nonprofit universities. But now the funding agencies are reading, like, you know, with millions of dollars, $10 to $20 million EPA community change. It reads that it could be an academic, but they actually sound like they want to go directly to communities or governments in some way. And I think that gives, I'd love to hear, Michael, your take or other communities' take on this, because that gives a different framing of the conversation, right? Because then It can be, what is the university's role? Where do they fit in with the community-defined problem? Where the funder says, if you define the problem, community, and you put together the application, and you have the track record, you're in the lead. You're leading it. And then you can do, just as I think you said, Sean, subcontract out for the services that you need, the technical services that you need. The other refreshing thing I've seen that is not a great fix, but it's this patch. It is these other entities which have a lower indirect rate that academics could direct the money to be the managers of the money, so that more of the money could go to the community, if that's the pinch point, right? Comparing like a 60% indirect rate to like whatever the independent fiscal sponsor would have. Maybe it's 10 or 15%, I don't know. Does that help, Sean?
Yes.
But I would be interested to hear, I mean, this is sort of maybe experiences that are around, well, the key thing, like how many dollars go towards solving the problems as defined by the community, right? But any other reflections or questions? Have you had any experiences with community partnership, community academic work, and would you be willing to share where you think it fell on the continuum?
I guess I can go. I think this is something that I grapple with on like a daily basis, and it kind of keeps me up at night. Because I've done some community research that I think falls on the continuum closer to something that's more exploitative, where I obviously wouldn't like it to be like that. I kind of came in as a student and I wanted to do like activism and engagement and things full time, because I've been an activist before, and so I saw academia as a great opportunity to like, I could personally, just as myself as a student, you know, have the right to do that work full time. But I kind of came in, I think, blasting without, you know, figuring out what I was doing before I turned up, which in retrospect, you know, I think I maybe would have done things a little bit differently. But now I'm kind of in this place where I'm really excited that I'm able to do this work full time, because I've built a lot of one-on-one relationships and connections with the community. Particularly, I work with older adults who usually aren't kind of engaged in this activism and community organizations. But I think the problem that I get to is I can hear from them the priorities of like what matters to them. You know, we struggle with accessing healthcare, or we struggle with doctors telling us that it's our fault, and things like that. So I've been able to identify things where it's like, you know, I think this is really important and I want to work on this. But then another issue that you get at is a lot of these people have really busy lives, and they don't have the time or the energy to contribute to something that's more collaborative. But it's obviously still important, and so I'm grappling as I'm only just starting PhD, like I haven't even matriculated formally. But I'm kind of grappling with like, there's obviously a community need, and I'm trying to work with SBCLT as well on how to like define this and shape it based on, you know, what the community needs and stuff. But then how do you engage when there's the struggle of, you know, how much are you asking of communities, right? Like at what point are you asking too much of people? Because I have the time and the resources to look at this full time. But I want to make sure that when I'm looking at it, I'm doing it in a way that, you know, the community wants me to be doing it. So I think about this like constantly. And my department has never given me any kind of engagement or successful answers. I go to my supervisor and I say like, I'm really struggling with this. And she's like, well, that's anthropology. And I'm like, no, come on.
Can I just ask, are you authorized to give any sort of honorarium or stipend to people who participate?
Well, currently, I actually went in being told that I was going to have money to like pay my rent and pay for food. And I actually just found out yesterday that they're saying that they might give me it retroactively, but they're not in a place to give it to me currently. So I literally don't have, like, I'm going into my savings and like the money that I make with side gigs. Hopefully, I would like to get to that
I
point.
meant for the community.
Yeah, for the community. Well, currently there's like no money anywhere. I would like to be, when I was doing the master's, I had money to compensate. It wasn't as much as I would like it to be, but I did. So, yeah.
Thank you so
That's why
much.
I'm here.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's revealing of the realities of, through academic channels, through academic structures, trying to use the capacities and skills and resources there in a way that could be directed at problems identified by the community, but it's not always easy, particularly as a student. It's not easy. Any reactions or anything else people want to?
I don't want to talk too much, but so if anyone has. But in speaking to a lot of, again, looking at these relationships, one thing that surfaced is the vulnerability of early career academics and graduate students and postdocs who want to do this work, who are trying to do this work, who sometimes get penalized for not, the standard is still publishing. They often don't even get credit, not even course credit for working with a community. That's what I was hearing a couple of years ago. I'm wondering if that's changed, if within the academic structure, there is more value being given to the tremendous amount of time that goes into this. And if it is, I spoke to a lot of young academics who thought they were actually getting penalized for wanting to do this kind of work, whether that's changing, especially with the change in the federal government's attitude towards this kind of work.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I just want to commend you for being super committed and dipping into your savings to fund research that you feel is important. And like, I know what that's like. You know what I mean? Like, setting up a nonprofit has been very challenging, community-based organization. So like, I totally get what you're going through and the struggles, but I also see how difficult it can be to have leverages in early career academic. How can you go up to the office and say, no, these people need this amount of money to be able to participate? Like, you're just trying to get through your PhD program, right? Be resourceful. See if, there's some way you can create benefit for them, even if you can't find the monetary resources to do so. Hopefully, there's something you can provide them of value to make them feel that they have maybe more capacity to chip in until you have more power to be able to delegate those things.
In the back?
Hi everybody, my name is Haley Morrison. I'm an environmental studies major, political science minor from Howard University, and I'm kind of just in the background listening. I want to specialize in environmental justice and health, and I was thinking about like, oh, do I want to go to like health school, health program, maybe master in that, and just hearing about some of the difficulties that you guys are experiencing, I was like, oh, I hope things get a little better. So that's kind of like my perspective right now, just because you said you wanted to hear like comments.
Well, so I think we can be. It's really important to share the challenges and to break down and be transparent about the things that are not working well. Because I think that often we just we don't learn or hear from individuals who might be practicing that work, because it's like the things that are so individual to the relationship with the community and an academic. So that's a space that I think is healthy for us to talk about the continuum, but just to put a brighter side on things. I mean, unfortunately it was late and I didn't catch Vernice Miller Chavez's keynote, but I understand that she spoke a lot about just the overwhelming emotion she felt at seeing the kind of transformative level of funding that's happening right now around these structural racism issues, structural environmental injustice issues. So I actually think it's a really exciting time, but with that, I think it's important for everybody to be, I don't mean to be so pedantic about this, but to be educated, to spot and to say, community engaged research is how they define themselves, but I'm well versed enough and fluent enough to say, well, it's actually farther down the continuum this way or that way, okay? That's a skill I think we all need to have, because who sees it right away and lives it in a really rough way? Michael, community sees it and knows it, and how can we as a community be checks and balances for each other, from academics, nonprofits, foundations, government, and students as well, and be asking that question. There's actually a formal academic discipline that sets up this continuum. there unfortunately are not didactic postdocs that are for community-based participatory research anymore, but the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation used to have it. The Community Health Scholars, Shakopee was one among the last cohorts of that. And then the W.K. Kellogg Foundation had the community track, which I was among the last cohort for. So foundations used to have, like that point that we heard from you, ways to propel and be leading the academic field at the highest levels, from institutions that lead, I don't need to say the names, but like the academic institutions that are just well respected. This was like an academic, there are standards of knowledge in this space of community engaged research, just like there are standards of knowledge in water chemistry, water microbiology, air, atmospheric chemistry. There are standards of knowledge against which there can be evidentiary proceedings in courts of law. There are standards of knowledge around community engaged research where you can ask questions and say, I think we're sliding too far down on an academic lead. We're not tracking the fact that there's no support for honoraria or incentives for participants. I'm not even being, so that we're trying to create a space through workshops like this where people could feel like, there are actually standards that we could be, at very least, self-aware of between our interactions with community and the responsibilities there, or to formally make people who we are in a power dynamic with where we are not possessing as much power.
Yeah, and I can speak to some of these. I'm a new researcher myself. I'm a young researcher in community engaged research, but also with a focus on environmental justice myself. So I can speak to this a little bit because I've had a lot of similar concerns coming into this space as well. And I think what's given me the most, what's been able to fill me up in some difficult times is thinking about my support structure. And from an academic perspective, that's thinking about, well, who are the people who are in my institution or other institutions that I might be able to connect with that are actually doing this work that is pushing this this field forward, who are actually embodying these 17 principles in their work. And so that's a model for me to see that, well, there's somebody at this institution that's able to actually do this and to keep moving forward keep moving forward their scholarship and their research along or at this end of the continuum, while making sure to deprioritize themselves and the power that's within that comes with being from a particular institution. Another thing that I also think about with doing environmental justice science and environmental justice research is that you have to consider the work that you're doing as building a foundation to do something different. Where a lot of what I'm learning from and reflecting on in this symposium is, like, we gotta rely on our networks and invest in our networks and the people around us. But also we have to be able to envision and enact what does a different status quo or a different situation look like, and think about how that actually embeds into our research, at least from an academic perspective. And a lot of that is because there's this relationship between individually what we can do, and then also what our research priorities are, which are coming externally from community priorities and perspectives. And so in enacting that vision, I feel like there's some hope to that. It's like within myself as an individual researcher, I can push something forward that's new. And so I try to stay grounded in that, even though sometimes it can feel solitary and it can feel difficult to kind of move the needle, that within yourself you already have a lot of potential to be able to build on and to take in the creativity of those around you to really produce something new and transformative. So to my young researchers out there, stay hopeful, but also connect with others. Like, this is a great space to be in, this symposium, where it's a great room to be in, the space of people who are thinking about these same things. And so remember that you always have that support, but sometimes you got to take the initiative to reach out. So I would really encourage you to do that as a young researcher as well.
I saw a hand over here. Maybe somebody was having an idea. Was it something that we already addressed?
It was me. I've had trouble reaching, I'm in a university-based, fringe and overhead kind of thing. We got a sudden amount of money from EPA, and going out to the communities, the amount of money that we have is too large for the smaller communities. And then if I've asked researchers, they're talking about intellectual property rights, and they don't want to give it to the community. So there's been, and there's a certain amount of mistrust within these communities, especially in Puerto Rico, over what they call EPA, EPA. But so that, I keep running. I'm like, our services are free. I can help you. I can, do the basics for you. I can give you that extra time that you need to put together a proposal. But they're not anywhere near ready to do it on their own. So I've had trouble getting to the community and getting the community trust. That's been the issue for us. I don't know how to connect the two. I get a lot of enthusiasm from communities, but not the actual groundwork. You guys have done an amazing job, but I'm based in New Jersey, in Newark, so we definitely have some environmental and justice issues. And I've gone out to the community, but again, there's a lot of mistrust. They don't know who I am from Adam.
Any reflections on that?
We're all the same, and I just want to underline what Maddie said, building foundation to do something different. And we do that by doing something different, right? And I've been really encouraged at seeing how you guys are operating. I wrote a thing about this community engaged research like 10 years ago. And I went back and saw it recently and thought, I would have a long revision on how that actually works. And because, you bounce through, because you have to understand that, the college has its own rules, right? You're going out and working grant to grant, right? Everybody's got their little thing. We're all gathering nuts, for winter. And winter comes more often than it should. And so what I think you're doing is laying the foundation for all these institutions to start doing it right. And it's long and it's hard. And even with, some of the partners that I like and trust at universities, the way that we've done it before is still kind of there. And so you have to kind of like, okay, let's have an honest conversation about which part of this belongs to me and to the school or to the community. And, it's just hard to break out of those structures. But I want to encourage you and maybe discourage you at the same time. I don't think it's ever been better. I think it's been worse before. And so I think, understand what the people before you went through, which was harder. Okay, so we're on an eve, and so your footprint is going to go farther than mine. Okay, so we need you. Don't give up.
I absolutely will. And what you were saying about how these institutions are starting to take on this community engaged research, I think it's also important to have nonprofits or government agencies, all of them. Like the DEI movement, how we're having different racial trainings, racial equity trainings. Maybe there needs to be more community engagement trainings. Because like you're saying, they're just not accepting you well enough. So maybe there needs to be a certain way that you need to speak. And in Power DC, I was in their last meeting, and they're talking about the Ivy City people were just saying don't just come into our community and help with one project. You actually can stay and keep doing this work. So I could also see how that could be an issue. Just making sure it's you don't just do it one time. Just keep working at it. Keep trying to gain their trust.
It may be, and I had this issue in one of the organizations that I previously worked for, right? If you're trying to engage with the community and you have a menu menu of services that you offer. And what's on your menu doesn't deal with the immediate need that they're facing in their community. They just want to live a normal life and breathe clean air, have clean water. I don't know what the specific issues that community is dealing with. But if what you're presenting seems large, big picture, and not meeting the immediate need, and you show up and ask them what they need and start to help them with some of the things that they immediately need, now that they can breathe for a second. Now, well, what if you applied for this federal funding and I could help you get there, and that could really create a solution to your problems, now that we're working together?
I mean, I've done a lot of listening sessions, but it's mostly yelling at me sessions. But I've gained a certain amount of perspective, but also because I live and work in a community that's suffering. But the assumption is, I think that somehow I'm not affected, which is kind of biased in the opposite way.
And are you specifically referring to people from the island or in New Jersey?
No, in New Jersey.
Or are you talking about Puerto Rico as well?
Yeah, as well, because I cover a lot of.
Are there leaders that you could identify that could do some of that
There's some,
connection,
but
that trust building
they
with you?
told me that the money in some of the grants that are out there are just too large for them to handle. They're just too small of a community based. And so when they start to partner up, then we run into all the other issues that come along with it. No stipends from the university to help with research, the kinds of things she's running into as well. So, and it's the university that's sort of holding us up. At the same time, it's easier that I don't have to manage the grant myself, so I can be out in the community. So there's kind of a disconnect. I'm not quite getting there. You know, and I've reached out to a lot of the locally based communities in both where I work and live. I've had more success where I live because I'm in a floodplain, and I'm near a CSX train, and you know, there's all kinds of things in my environment that brought me to this space. But there's nobody that's ready to take on that huge amount of money and deal with it. I wish there was larger community organizations.
Could you split it into multiple
That's what I
smaller
would love to, but they said no. So they kind of
ones?
stuck
The
us.
university said no?
No, EPA said no. So, yeah,
Wow.
it's not, the thriving communities is like, you know, 10 million. Here, we'll give you 10 million if you can do this grant. Not, you know, 1,000 to 500,000 or something that's manageable.
Yeah.
So we have to start from, you know, are you registered in SAM? Are you, you know,
Right.
we have to start, and they're not ready to take that on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really difficult problem. I just wondered, isn't there any kind of like a consortium that, of community organizations or of people who can broker these kinds of relationships and form like a bundle that the money could go to? You know, like, there's gotta be something like that. It seems like such a need.
Yeah, there is a huge need. Here, I've noticed there's a lot in this area. The Baltimore, Washington DC area, there's a lot of, so I tried to do the research to see if there was, and there, again, the mistrust, you know, I've spoken to local communities, churches, temples, you know,
Did you talk to
and,
SWIA?
yeah,
They
No.
can't take it.
nope.
Yeah, I mean, this is a common challenge. We've just, using one example, Tic-Tac is a great example. The community change is another great example.
Those are better because the amounts are smaller.
Yeah, but I think, right, for the track 2, they're smaller. For track 1, they're 10 to 20 million, right? And so it's the same issue in that if you read the fine print, and this is often where this continuum kind of comes up, because there's fine print that says, depending on you as a financial organization, depending on your track record and how you can bring forward documentation that you've managed, you know, grants of a certain size before, you're going to be put into 2 categories of financial auditing risk. And I'm paraphrasing, it's either high risk or low risk, and you got this. And often, the community organizations find themselves that we would be in the high risk. And when they reach out to the technical support staff for the grants, they tend to confirm that. So what I've seen happen is the trust issues never go away. That's a reality of this whole thing. It's the power responsibility. Trust, you have to be open about, and it changes on a weekly, on a daily, right? It can be like this week, this thing, it was late and delayed, and they're dipping into savings because the contract, I think, was late, right? We've been there. We've had to manage that. And so, but building a consortium, I've seen in the community-based participatory research, the apex pinnacle examples that are lifted up by people like Jeannie Ng, Meredith Menkler, Barbara Israel, all the people who wrote the book on CVPR. You build a table, and often what we're talking about with Comer, the community builds the table and invites who they want there, right? And that's where, if the funding's going right there and they have the fiscal health to do it, the table should be set by the community, and they should be bringing lawyers, scientists, policy experts, government officials, regulatory agents. They should be building. But sometimes you can find an academic, if you have examples to say, could you build this and create the Comer equity and funding, parity and management, where we're all co-equals. I think that's often where the trust is the university, as Sean, and I forget the next woman's comment here, is like, how do you navigate just those things that universities are? They're their own animal. They are. It's like you are designed as a university to, be speaking about the leading edge of your work, and really like promoting that. So I think, I don't know, I think could you build a table, right? And who would be the entity? Around Baltimore and Washington, there are these 501c3s that have started that will be that fiscal sponsor and take a smaller cut and manage the distribution of funds if a university can't do it. I don't know if somebody could do that in that case or not.
Yeah,
What are the
that-
range of issues that, like air, water, soil?
I mean, in Newark, for example, where the university is based, we have one of the largest ports. Right next door, we have the airport. We've got the trains. We've got the trucks coming into the port to pick up stuff. So there's a lot of health issues. And we've all had a lot of exposure. They just started working on the lead in the pipes. So the whole community is lead based. So there's tons of health issues that are just not being addressed.
There's some folks at Rutgers who we know and have met through the Charm Center that are doing great work and help support the EJ bill passage with community farm. I don't know if maybe at Rutgers.
Yeah, I mean, Rutgers is right across the street from us. Martin Luther King sort of separates us. They're on one side, we're on the other, and there is some mixture. But again, there's a weird mistrust of us. I think it was because of the fight over the University of Medicine and Dentistry. They got it and we tried. And so it's a stupid,
No, but there's always that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's always those histories. Okay, we are at time. I was wondering, if people might bear with me, I just wanted to see if any of our high school students who are here, could we just check in? Is this stuff like all Greek? I wondered maybe from the summer youth and environmental justice scholars experience, if maybe you would share, what did it look like to you? Where did you feel like you fell? Did you feel like there were professors teaching you all the time, or was it somewhere a mix? I didn't know if you might be willing to share.
Right. Yeah, I guess it was kind of a mix. It was wonderful to hear people talk about their experiences, how they're helping their own community, and the difficulties that they face trying to support their community. There was like, I guess a lot of it did went over my head, but in the end I feel very kind of inspired by the people who were talking about kind of like the sacrifices they made in order to continue helping out the communities. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but like, yeah.
That's big. Thank you for sharing.
In my eyes, I kind of understand, but most of it kind of went over my head. But I understand that it's more about
trying to help the community and meeting their needs rather than universities taking all the money.
Yeah. All this time, money, power, community, not ceding that, not giving it up. And actually, the thing is that just if you're ever struggling for ways to backstop an argument, just to get, there is a lot of peer-reviewed science. This is, and we always struggle with this. I'm going to say it in a way, it's maybe a little bit, but there's not a kid's table and an adult's table in science, in the scientific realm, okay? Like, this is the point where now, and the federal government's putting money where it's like, if you want to use that analogy, the adults are like, whoa, why are the kids getting all the toys and all the, like, you know, amazing fancy things? So I think that sort of, a lot of this is bubbling up, and I've heard Jacoby say a lot that there's gold up in the EJ Hills now. And so that's something I think that we just all need to really be aware of, is that there are really rigorous standards of scientific knowledge in this space that we should be supporting each other with. If we're feeling like, man, I feel like we're just getting trampled on. I feel like that university or whoever it is just kind of, that we can be NGO or whatever. So we're here if anybody wants to follow up afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.